Hey guys, Griff here, and this video is a step-by-step guide to massively improving your tanking skills. In under 10 minutes, you will get a new understanding for how tanks work in Marvel Rivals, and maybe change your perception on them just a little bit. Now, tanking is not purely about soaking up damage. To boil it down to 3 core components, playing as a tank is about 1. Physically disrupting the enemy team, 2. Making space, and then 3. Making opportunities with that space. To give you an example, let's use an overhead view of the map. As Hulk, I dive into the front line and start applying pressure. You'll notice that the front line starts to split, and you'll cause a break in formation. This is pressure, and pressure is a crucial part of being a tank. What you're doing is essentially getting enemies to expend resources. As they're expending resources on you, those are resources they're not expending on your team. These resources can be their abilities, which you've now forced to be on a cooldown because they're using them on you, or their attention. Attention is also a resource, and that attention is now distracted by you. As a tank, you have the health bar to soak up these resources. You can use your symbiotic resilience as Venom, which grants 100 bonus health and converts 120% of lost health into bonus health. Or you can use your indestructible guard as Hulk, which generates gamma shields for you and nearby allies. While you're maintaining pressure, you're stealing enemies' attention away, making it so they're no longer targeting teammates. If you're pressuring an opponent with Hulk, for instance, they'll be reacting to you and fail to notice maybe the Storm on your team who's now applying damage to the enemy. Being a tank is all about being on top of the distribution of damage. If you attract damage towards yourself, even for a second, that's an extra second your teammates have to attack your enemy. Your opponents now need to spend resources to deal with that distraction, and in the chaos, your troops can secure objectives. An important thing to remember is that you don't necessarily have to have loads of KOs to be a successful tank. It's more about disrupting the enemy's movement and positioning. So don't look at the leaderboard and be obsessed by that and then get disheartened about not being up there in terms of KOs. If you helped your team towards victory, that's your ultimate goal, which is where the different categories of tank come into play. There are so many elements that go into making an effective tank in this game, so let's get into exactly what you should be doing as a tank, who you should be targeting, where you need to be pushing, and how aggressive you need to be. For that, we need a better understanding of the different tank roles. Mastering the role of tank requires you to know how different tanks operate. So we have the 2 main categories of tank, which are main tank and off tank. A main tank is someone who makes space and does the pushing, like Strange or Magneto. An off tank would be Hulk and Penny, who support their main tank with the push while peeling off to cause havoc with the enemy team. But we can get more specific with 3 more categories, and these indicate further how a tank is supposed to be played. These are the subgenres of dive, poke, and brawl. Dive is all about having speed and mobility, which allows you to literally dive into encounters. So Strange or Magneto are way too slow to be dive characters, but Venom and Hulk come under the dive tank categorization. Venom uses his swing, which has a cooldown of 8 seconds, while Hulk can use his leap, which has a charge time of 0.7 seconds. Next, poke. Poke tanks are all about dealing damage from long to medium range. This includes heroes like Penny or Magneto, so they're more passive and offensive. You do not want to get in amongst the enemies as poke tanks. If you see an enemy behind you, move back because you are too close. You have projectile attacks, so use them to your advantage. Finally, brawl. Brawl tanks are the closest range tanks. Like dive tanks, they fight up close and personal, but unlike dive tanks, they lack an escape route and have a decreased mobility. An archetypal brawler in Marvel Rivals are Cap and Thor. Yes, you can use vertical abilities to evade with these characters, but they're not going to help you completely escape from the action. So don't play these like a dive tank and dive in, because you won't last long. A general rule of thumb is having one main tank and one off tank. Never play two of the same tanks in the same match. So if you see someone playing Magneto, don't pick Strange because they're the same sort of tank. Pick an off tank like Hulk. If you see someone pick Hulk, then vice versa. Pick a main tank like Strange or Magneto. Just implementing this one thing will impact how you play Marvel Rivals. If you're not getting healed, there's a reason. It's not because your healers suck, although sometimes that is the solution, but most of the time it's because you're not protecting them. Take a look in the top right corner. If you see your healers are constantly getting KO'd, help them out by staying with them. Your presence alone is going to scare off would-be attackers, and a few tanks also have abilities to protect teammates. Hulk's shield and Magneto's shield do the job. In turn, your healers are going to be healing the rest of your team, which alleviates the lack of impact from you being away from the front line. So in effect, you're trading your tank's ability into healing ability. But as always, use this strategy based on each individual match. Communication is incredibly important as a tank. Again, if your healer is not doing their job, ask them directly what they need from you. They might be constantly getting picked off by an Iron Fist or a Psylocke, so work to remedy that and you will notice a difference. It's all about being pragmatic, work out each problem and solve them and you will see massive gains. Okay, so what if you find yourself in a stalemate? You can't gain an inch and neither can your opponent, so you're just trading poke damage in an elongated standoff. This is where I say be the difference maker, lead the charge. You might all get eliminated, but hey, it's better than losing a boring stalemate. But don't rush in alone, wait until your team are with you and be the rally point. When you charge in, they will likely do the same because they've seen you leading by example, and now all of a sudden you've made up some ground. Now, people make a common mistake with diving. Often they'll dive in with no consideration for the most important part of playing a dive tank: getting back out. You shouldn't think of diving as merely getting into the thick of the enemy lines, but instead distracting the enemy just enough so that the damage isn't concentrated on your team. Once that's done, use your ability to get out of the area and get yourself healed up. But here's a sneaky little tip: you don't always have to dive. As a dive tank, the threat of the dive is enough to unsettle opponents. In other words, pretend you're going to dive, but don't. You will notice this if you're playing a tank. You will just draw enemy fire automatically purely because you're the biggest, most intimidating character on the battlefield. If an enemy sees a Venom or a Hulk coming, that's where much of the fire is going to go, even if you don't dive. So threaten the dive by being aggressive and you can attract a portion of damage without even diving. In the meantime, your teammates can take advantage of that and get a KO or two. Now, what happens if you take all of the advice you see in this video and it still isn't working? Here's what you need to remember: it's always acceptable to switch your tank. If your current tank isn't working, it means the enemy has figured you out and implemented a counter. When this happens, switch tank. For instance, the enemy team might be deciding to pool their firepower and target you, and aim to get you out of the picture immediately. This is an effective strategy because, contrary to popular belief, tanks aren't immortal. They are not gods of the battlefield. If all of the opponent team start targeting you, your health will go down fast. So if your team is yelling at you to get better at tanking, it's not entirely on you. This is a team game after all, so you need to monitor what's happening and work with your team to find a solution. One of the ways to do that is switch to a different tank, whether it's dive, poke or brawl. Tank sustainability in this game is based on having two tanks. I mean, solo tanks can work, but one tank can't tank as long as two tanks can. So in conclusion, improve your tanking in Marvel Rivals in the following ways. Make sure your team doesn't have two tanks of the same type on the battlefield at any one time. Protect your healers. Communicate with your team to find out what they need, and you can use the ping system for this. Lead the charge if there's a stalemate. and if you dive in, make sure you can dive back out. So those were a few tips on how to tank in Marvel Rivals. If you enjoyed the video, do leave a like and subscribe for more Marvel Rivals guides.
Double KO! How's that for a greatest hit, Luna?